3 days before Christmas, a driver swipes his company fuel card at a truck stop and watches it decline. Within hours, hundreds of trucks go dark across the country, and the men behind the wheel are told to leave them where they sit and find their own way home. For a long-haul driver, the truck is not yours. That is the first thing to understand about December 22nd, 2009. The rig a man lives in 300 days a year. Photos taped to the dash, boots behind the seat, a coffee mug that's ridden 250,000 miles, is almost never owned by the driver, and often not even by the company whose name is on the door. It belongs to a bank or to the finance arm of a truck manufacturer in another state. The carrier leases it. The driver drives it. So when Arrow went dark, the drivers scattered across the interstate weren't just losing a job. They were sitting inside someone else's property, some 1,000 miles from home, with a dead fuel card, a bounced paycheck, a trailer of freight that wasn't theirs, and one instruction coming down the line: leave it. Take what you can carry, find your own way home. No money for diesel, no money for a bus ticket. Stranded by the company they'd been hauling for that morning. The version that got written down afterward was the comfortable one. A brutal recession, diesel near $4 a gallon, a freight market that had fallen off a cliff in 2008. Every word of that is true. None of it is why Arrow died. Underneath the recession, running quietly through Arrow's last year, there was a machine built for one purpose: to pull money out of the company. And the man whose name sat on the side of the building had spent that same year spending in ways that, set down next to those bounced paychecks, rearrange the entire story. To understand how a 61-year-old company died this way, you have to understand two men who shared a last name and almost nothing else. Jim Peelsticker bought Arrow in 1968, the same year his son Doug was born. It was small then, half a dozen trucks, and over 3 decades he built it into a giant. More than 1,300 rigs under the Arrow name. He'd been a driver himself, and it showed. People remembered an owner who walked out of his office in a shirt and tie to load freight by hand, who knew employees' kids by name. In Tulsa, the Peelsticker name on a trailer meant something. Then, in 2001, Jim Peelsticker died in a plane crash in Canada. Arrow passed to Doug, and by every account that ended up in the record, the son was the photographic negative of the father. In court documents, Doug described his own management style as somewhat removed. A longtime employee put it less kindly. The boss was rarely seen, and when he did appear, he looked like he'd slept in his clothes. One driver compressed the whole inheritance into a single line. It took the son about 8 years to run his father's company into the ground. 8 years. And most of the killing was done with paper. Trucking sits on a cash flow problem that never goes away. A carrier hauls a load today, sends an invoice, then waits 30, 60, 90 days to get paid, while fuel, wages, and truck payments all come due now. So the industry leans on factoring. Take your unpaid invoices to a bank. The bank fronts most of the cash on the spot, and when the customer pays, the bank collects a fee. Completely ordinary. A huge share of the freight world runs on it every week. In November of 2008, Arrow signed exactly that kind of deal, a large receivables purchase agreement with a Utah lender called Transportation Alliance Bank. On paper, clean, boring financing. The paper was where the crime lived. Prosecutors laid out that Arrow had been feeding the bank invoices it knew were inflated, drawing real cash against freight bills that were padded or that no customer actually owed. And here's the detail that turns a financial scheme into something colder. When the bank called to verify those invoices, Arrow employees got on the phone, at the direction of the people above them, and pretended to be Arrow's own customers, confirming charges that didn't exist. It's the defense the chief financial officer would later lean on in court. I was only doing what I was told. A scheme like that has a built-in clock. Every fake invoice has to be covered by a bigger one. Arrow wasn't a strong company the recession drowned. It was being hollowed out from the inside, and the recession was just the water it was standing in when the floor gave way. By the time investigators finished counting, the inflated invoices had pulled more than $11 million out of that one bank, most of it inside a single year. 3 people inside the building ran it: Doug Peelsticker at the top, Jonathan Moore, the chief financial officer, Joseph Mowry, the general counsel. One of the 3 walked away from all of it. Mowry died of natural causes in 2011 and was never charged. Whatever he knew went into the ground with him. The reason the other 2 didn't walk is the man who kept the books. Moore cooperated with federal investigators for years and testified against his own boss. Without him, prosecutors said, Peelsticker very likely never pleads guilty to anything. Moore's own defense was that he'd never truly profited. He'd kept his job, gone along on some trips, and that was all. In a sworn affidavit, he insisted over and over that he'd only been following orders. He even sued Peelsticker and Mowry for slander. When the sentences landed, Moore got 35 months. Peelsticker got 90. While the invoices were being faked, and by late 2009, the employees' own paychecks were bouncing, court records show how the man at the top was spending. Almost $5,700 in a single day at his favorite sushi restaurant, around $1,280 at a flower shop in the month before the company closed. Travel, meals, and entertainment billed straight to the company, as high as $60,000 in a single month. And then the detail that to anyone who's ever turned a wrench on a company truck lands like an open-handed slap. Doug Peelsticker drove a Bentley, a company car, on Arrow's money. When he couldn't find a mechanic in Tulsa to work on it, he had it towed to Dallas and back, more than $5,000. In the very same stretch, Arrow was telling its drivers it couldn't afford to fix the trucks they were trying to make a living in. The trucks couldn't be fixed. The Bentley got a ride to Dallas. The cruelty of the timing wasn't just bad luck with the calendar. In at least one case, the company sat a man down and sold him deeper into it days before the lights went out. Picture an owner-operator, not a company driver on a wage, but a man buying his own truck out from under the carrier through a lease-purchase agreement. The pitch is the oldest one in trucking. Stop being an employee, be your own boss, make your payments, and at the end, the truck is yours. This driver had already paid more than $50,000 toward owning his rig. On December 16th, 6 days before Arrow collapsed, he sat down and renewed that agreement. When Arrow defaulted, he went to Daimler Financial, which actually held the note. Daimler had no record of his payments. The $50,000 he'd handed Arrow had vanished into Arrow, and taking ownership now would cost him more than he'd ever believed he owed. When a carrier fails, a company driver loses a paycheck and finds another seat. A lease-purchase driver loses the paycheck, the truck, and every dollar he poured into a machine that was supposed to one day be his. The men who'd believed in Arrow the most walked away with the least. News like this moves fast, over the CB, over the phone, and that December, for the first time, over the internet. The response didn't come from Arrow. Rival carriers stepped straight in. Schneider National and System Transport, outfits that fought Arrow for the same loads on the same lanes, publicly told stranded Arrow drivers to flag their trucks down on the highway and climb up for a ride home. There's a code on the road that nobody writes down, older than any of these companies. You do not leave another driver stuck. Doesn't matter whose logo is on his door, or that he was hauling for the outfit that undercut your rate last week. A man stranded with no money and no way home is a man you stop for. That code is the only reason a lot of them made it back for Christmas at all. And then the irony sitting dead in the center of it. It was the finance companies, Daimler and Navistar, the outfits that actually owned those abandoned trucks, that got the drivers home. They covered bus tickets, or $200 cash, for any driver who brought the equipment back to a dealer. The companies holding the liens did more for Arrow's drivers than the man who'd been holding the company. The wreckage took years to settle, and parts of it never did. The trucks sat where their drivers had left them until the finance companies and local authorities came to collect them. Months later, what was left of the fleet, the entire point of the lease-purchase dream, was auctioned off in the infield of a horse racing track at the Tulsa Fairgrounds. Doug Peelsticker moved to Dallas. For a while he drove for Uber until the company dropped him over the criminal charges, a former CEO on the same road as the people he'd stranded. But he never really left trucking. Even as investigators were building the case, 2 companies with his wife listed as manager were operating out of the Dallas area, and both, in time, had their federal operating licenses revoked. His name was on none of the paperwork. To the men told to abandon their trucks 3 days before Christmas, it confirmed what they'd suspected all along. Under one name or another, Doug Peelsticker had never really gotten out of the business at all.